Hello, I'm Otto, and I'm here with Dick Funnell, and we're here to talk today regarding the worldwide prayer movement that God is raising up all across the globe. And like myself, Dick has been on an amazing adventure with God, and I hope you'll take a few minutes to listen with us as we hear what God has been doing in Wales. So it's good to have you here, Dick.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Just to begin, tell us what you're doing right now.
I am currently living in Wales. I've been there for almost 7 years and involved in praying for revival. I spend every morning up in an old semi-abandoned chapel. It's still in use, but just once a month. And the heart of our ministry has really been called to go and pray in this specific chapel. And so that's the main thrust of what we've been doing.
I was very fascinated when I read your story, partly because it was similar to how God had brought me to New England. And
Okay.
I had a very clear call. Could you just, what I'd like to do is kind of talk a little bit about how you got the sense that you were called to Wales, and how some of the details, because there were some really amazing pieces to the story that I think people will be blessed to hear. So when did you first sense that God was calling you to Wales from the ministry that you were doing?
Well, it was really 2002 when God spoke to me. It was a second time that I'd actually been in Wales. And that was where God spoke to me and said, I want you to come and pray here every day. And that was where it really got serious. Yeah.
You mentioned the term God spoke to you. You know, people ask me quite a bit, you know, when you say God speaks to you, what does that mean, and how do I do that? What did that mean to you when God was speaking to you? How did that happen?
I'd kind of have to fill in some of the background to give you a more ample picture, but at one specific moment when I was praying, heartbroken, weeping before God, and I said, Lord, if there were anything that I could do, and no sooner had those words come out of my mouth, and God spoke to me, I can't say it was audibly, but it was louder than audible. And he said, I want you to come back to this little chapel that I showed you 3 years ago, and I want you to pray here every day. And if you do, then the revival that I showed you in that vision is going to happen before your eyes.
Well, could you tell us a little bit about the vision you had, a little bit about the background? Was that was in 1999, right?
Yes.
That you had the initial vision.
Yes.
Share a little bit about that vision.
Okay. It was, I got saved in the Jesus movement in the late 70s, and we were taught to go into all the world and make disciples of all nations. And that you're supposed to do that literally. It's not a theological concept that you kind of tuck away somewhere. Right. And in 1976, I went to Guatemala after a devastating earthquake with a group from our ministry. And in 1980, some other old friends that we had worked very closely with and become Christians in the same place in Northern California came to Birmingham, England. And I received a phone call. It was in the fall of 1998. From an old ministry friend that we'd all gotten saved back in the Jesus movement. And he said, I don't know if you knew that Alex Elsesser and his family have bought an old farm out in West Wales. And I've just come back from cleaning it up. And it needs a lot of work, and I'm trying to get a group of people that would come next spring. Would you be interested in going? And of course I was fascinated. I hadn't seen Alex for years and years, and we worked very closely together for a few years before I went to Guatemala. And so Gladys and I went over to Wales in the spring of 1999 to work on this farm. And we were staying in a cottage a few miles away, and being a country boy, every day we'd go over to Alex's farm. I would find a different little road to snoop around on my way over. And I kept seeing these little chapels, maybe not so little, some of them, but they all seemed like they were kind of closed and out of business. And I was vaguely aware. I knew of the Welsh revival. I knew it had a massive impact. I didn't know really any details. And a couple of days before we left, really something happened. From where I was staying, from our bedroom, I could see this beautiful green hilltop. And mostly it was sunny weather on Welsh and its norm, but there was just something very attracting to me. Having left the highlands of Guatemala to the swamps of Louisiana, any bump over 100 feet was a big attraction. And so this particular morning, I was woken very early, and I just felt God was saying, I want you to come out here. Yeah. So I got dressed and I walked out the door, and it was overcast, kind of misty. I didn't know if the mist was going to stay mist or turn to rain, but I really knew God wanted me to go out there. Yeah. And so I wound my way up towards this hill. And on the way up, there was a little dog leg in the road, and there was a sign saying to Kilvalware Chapel. So I, of course, was interested because I'd seen these chapels. And I went down this little gravel road, and there was this beautiful chapel out in the middle of the wheat fields. And I remember I looked at it, and I just felt my heart grieve, and I just thought, wow, God, what happened? Yeah. And I went back up to the main road and continued on up and wound my way up to the top of this hill through a field. And as I got near the top, I was actually weeping, and I was just praying, and really there was this deep grieving in my heart. And I remember saying to the Lord, how did a revival that had such an effect 100 years, not even 100 years previous, just kind of turn into nothing? My understanding at the time was less than 5% of the population in the UK went to any kind of church or chapel at all. And so as I was just kind of pleading with God and asking, well, what happened? There was a place at the top where the hedgerows come together. And the Lord spoke to me and said, the problem is that they've come away from the ancient landmarks, and they became satisfied just with a tradition of going to chapel and doing their Sunday business, and they've walked away from a relationship with me, their loving Father. And I just wept, and I wept, and I actually climbed up on the hedgerows, and as I was up there, it was quite windy, and the clouds were blowing overhead like muffins in a tin, and I almost got knocked off a couple of times. The wind was really gusty. Yeah. But I was just praying, and just I was really, shouting in my prayer and weeping. And at one point, suddenly the clouds opened up, and a shaft of sunlight came shooting down, sweeps across a little meadow, and then up over a woodlot, and closes up again. But as soon as I saw that, I felt something begin to stir in my spirit. And they didn't know quite what. And then maybe a minute or so later, I was looking off in another direction, because I could see all 360 degrees from this hilltop. And suddenly the clouds part again, and this shaft of sunlight comes down, sweeps over this wheat field, hits the chapel that I had just stopped at on my way up, and instead of sweeping over it stopped. And they were like these golden flames that just kind of overswept the chapel and went heavenwards. And God spoke to me and said, I'm bringing revival again to Wales. And as he spoke these things to my spirit, I wept harder, and I was like, wow, God, that would be so amazing. And that window closed up, and so I'm praying even from a deeper place now, and encouraged by what the Lord had said. And I was looking in another direction. Once again, I see a opening in the sky. The sun comes down and sweeps up and hits another chapel on a far-off hilltop. And again, the Lord repeats, I'm bringing revival to this land. And that closed up, and I'm weeping harder and just praying harder. And then the only way I can explain it is the Lord picked me up maybe 300 or 400 yards into the sky. And now I could see over the top of hills that I couldn't see over. And I saw another cloud come down, a sunshine come down through the clouds, light up another chapel over here, and then I was given like telescopic vision. I could see over into England, I could see up into Scotland, and chapel after chapel were illuminated by this light from heaven. And God said, I'm bringing revival again. And he spoke to me that he was going to go through the UK, across the English Channel into Europe. And by this time I was just reduced to tears and joy, and yet a deep longing to have the Spirit of God move over these nations the way they need.
Yeah.
And so that was the beginning. I had no clue back at this time. I just thought, wow, God is up to something, and it's going to be